Hello and welcome to Quest Recapped. This 2018 American movie shows the true story of a street dog whose fate completely changes when it decides to become a great soldier and fight alongside young American soldiers in the First World War. It all begins with the indication of the hard life the dog lives as a street dog, getting food after going through a garbage can, hardly having any shelter and being bullied by troglodytes. Then one day, while in search of shelter, it loses a bone it had been lucky to find. In the bid to track it down, it comes across a platoon of American soldiers. One of the soldiers, whose name is Robert, gives the hungry dog a cookie, and the animal decides to follow him. The year is 1917, and the United States joined in the war against Germany. Before the American army joined the war, the Europeans had been fighting the Germans for 3 years with no hope of winning. But the Americans joining the war increased their chances of winning. Robert, being one of the drafted soldiers, marches into the training center where he's undergoing training. And the dog tries to follow him in, but is stopped at the door. But he gets in by going under the wooden fence. Before finding Robert, the dog makes a quick stop at the kitchen, but is chased away by the cook. It runs out of the kitchen and collides with Robert, whom he starts sniffing for cookies. Robert recognizes the dog and tries to chase it away before getting him in trouble. But the dog barks and draws the attention of Sergeant Casburn. Sergeant Casburn immediately develops a liking for the dog and orders Robert to give it food. To the dismay of the cook, the dog is fed. During lunch, Robert's friend Hans Schroeder, a boy of German descent, expresses his surprise at the sergeant's instruction. But Olson, another of Robert's friends, mentions that they won't be able to keep the dog because the colonel won't approve. At night, the dog tries to sleep on Robert's bed, but is not allowed to do so and ends up sleeping on the floor. The next morning, the young soldiers are woken up by a loud alarm. They head to the training ground and the dog accompanies them. All through the training, the dog also practices whatever is done by the soldiers, and every one of them soon becomes attached. Even Sergeant Casburn sings its praises and mentions that it's more fit than most men in the platoon. After a few nights in the training camp, Roberts allows the dog to sleep on the bed, and there he decides to keep him. So he names the dog Stubby to make it official. However, Olson reminds him that the colonel will ask the dog to leave once he finds out. Determined to keep the dog, he begins to teach it some tricks that will impress the colonel, and lucky enough it works. Because just a few days later, the colonel discovers the dog, but after seeing the dog salute, he welcomes the dog to the army. During the last training before they go to the battlefield, the colonel takes the members of the platoon to a barn and orders them to use gas masks. But after releasing the gas, he orders them to take off the mask. This results in a coughing fit, and the colonel opens the door for them to leave the barn. The training was to remind them to always have their masks close by on the battlefield. Stubby, not wanting to be left out, also learns to use its paws to cover its snout. Then the day to leave for France arrives. After praising the members of the platoon, the colonel mentions that Stubby will help train the next set of soldiers. On hearing this, Robert realizes that his friend won't be going with him, and this makes him very sad. Before leaving, Robert writes a letter to his sister Margaret and packs his bag. Although Stubby doesn't understand what is going on, he notices Robert's sadness and tries to get into the suitcase. But Robert gives the dog a collar as a parting gift instead. Stubby finds it hard to get used to wearing a collar, but after seeing himself in the mirror, he's pleased. Before Robert leaves, he ties a rope around the collar and with a broken heart, hands the dog over to the cook. The cook then ties the dog up in a corner of the kitchen. Not wanting to be left behind, the dog breaks free and follows Robert's scent through the street. The scent leads it to a train, and he gets on the train. On getting to the pier, he sees Robert going on a ship. So he sneaks into a box of supplies going on the ship. During the journey, Stubby comes out of hiding and proceeds to look for his friend. With a great deal of effort not to be seen, the dog finds Robert. The soldier is so happy to see the dog, but becomes worried that the dog will not be allowed to continue the journey once discovered. So with the help of his two friends, he keeps the dog hidden. Stubby is eventually discovered by the captain, but the dog salutes and the captain is impressed. Immediately he orders the soldiers to make an identification plate for him, thereby becoming an official member of the platoon. They arrive at their destination and are shocked to see how terrible the condition of the French is. Immediately, Stubby makes himself useful by scaring all the pests out of the trenches to make the young soldiers comfortable. But before they could settle in, they witnessed their first attack, and it was terrifying. So Robert sets out to keep Stubby safe at any cost. Stubby, on the other hand, takes up an important mission to rescue wounded and buried soldiers. One day, during lunch, Roberts and his friends get into a fight with the cook because he refuses to serve some food to his dog. The fight is broken up by a French soldier named Gaston. After that, Gaston reveals that he and his men have been ordered to work together with Robert and Stubby to keep an eye on the Germans. After lunch, the Frenchmen, Stubby, Robert, and his friends go on their mission, and they're shocked to find an entire city destroyed by the Germans. The next morning, they continue on their mission, and when they are close to the enemy camp, they hide in the bushes and watch the movements using binoculars. During their spying mission, they discover that the enemy intends to attack using toxic gas. They immediately try to run back to their camp to sound the alarm, but they're stopped when Stubby spots an enemy soldier hiding in the trees. As he is about to shoot Robert, the dog knocks his friend down, thereby preventing him from being hit by the bullet. They resume running and finally get to where their horses are, but the gunshots startle them, and Robert is unable to ride back to his camp. So he orders Stubby to go to their camp to warn the soldiers about the attack. After doing that, he heads to the village to also warn the residents about the incoming attack. But Stubby is unable to return to the camp before the gas is launched. He is saved by Roberts and Gaston, and the three of them hide in a barn until the gas wears off. Everyone is grateful to the American hero for the warning, and they head back to the camp. On their way back, Stubby hunts for a rabbit, and the two men make a meal out of it. After eating, Gaston shows Robert a picture of his family. He has a beautiful wife and 3 beautiful daughters who he has not seen in 2 years. Robert also shares that he lost his parents a few years back and only has siblings, 1 elder sister and 2 younger ones. He also mentions that he believes he'll return home to create a family of his own. On getting to the camp, they find it under attack, and Sergeant reveals that Private Claiborne was wounded on the other side of the barrier. Despite the ongoing bomb attacks, Stubby rushes to begin his rescue mission. Out of worry, Robert follows him, and soon the dog finds a wounded soldier and calls on his friend to help. Several months pass, and soon it's time to move to a new war zone. Before leaving, the dog is awarded a robe by the villagers for his actions during the gas attack. Gaston also gives him a specially made gas mask. Soon they arrive at their new destination, and it doesn't take long before they're attacked. Ever active, Stubby soon lures in some German invaders, and they're captured by Gaston and Robert. But a few minutes later, Stubby gets hurt after trying to save Olsen by catching an explosive. Robert runs to help him, and it is discovered that Hans is also hurt. Both the injured dog and man are then taken to the hospital, and Robert is left very worried. It doesn't help that the condition at the trenches worsens afterwards. The conflicts become non-stop, and the rain becomes endless. After a while, the Germans proceed to Paris, but the American soldiers fight against it. During this period, the relationship between Gaston and Robert becomes stronger, but their friendship is cut short when Gaston is ordered to return to the base of his regiment. Sad to lose another friend, Roberts becomes very unhappy and struggles to live past each day. Then a ray of hope shines when the French and American soldiers recapture Sicapri and force the Germans to retreat. Just a while later, Hans wakes up in the hospital and he sees Stubby right beside him, almost fully recovered. When Stubby realizes that Robert is not there, he decides to go find him. On his way, he smells sausages, and after being without food for so long, he decides to go for it. Unluckily, they were made by German soldiers, and he barely escapes their capture. Before Stubby could find his friend, Robert had fallen sick. He got the flu that rampaged the earth in 1918. He could barely walk and coughed most of the time. Due to the effect of the virus, he was just hanging on to a thread. Meanwhile, Stubby is still following the trail of sense. After several stops, he finds his friend. Robert is very happy to see that Stubby has returned, and his strength immediately returns after seeing the dog. After 6 months of exhausting combat, man and dog finally get a leave of absence. They visit Paris with their American friends, and they spend their days enjoying the scenery. They take walks in the street and also take pictures. In September 1918, there was an announcement that the war was coming to an end because the German army was retreating. But that midnight, Stubby catches a German spy who was sneaking around the American camp. And with the help of Robert and their friends, the spy gets captured. Due to the bravery portrayed by the dog, the captain awards Stubby the honorary title of sergeant. From that day, he wears the U.S. Army insignia. Also, Robert becomes a private. Before the war finally comes to an end, the two groups face each other for a last time, and several men lose their lives. Robert's friend Olsen dies from a gunshot to his head. but the rest of the crew survives. On getting back home, Sergeant Stubby became the most decorated dog and Robert remained a proud friend. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, kindly let us know in the comments section below. See you in the next video.